Okay, so welcome everybody to a newly qualified instructor session. So this evening is all about trying to give you guys a little bit more boost starting out. Being a new instructor isn't easy, so we'll talk about a few of the things that are going to help you out. So what will we cover? So first of all, we'll talk about self-assessment. So a bit of introspection, looking at your own skills, what you can, what you can't do, how to get out of that. We'll also talk about those first few courses. So starting out, how to, gently ease yourself into instruction. It's not something that you just want to rush into headlong. We'll talk about good and bad habits, so things that you do want to do and some things that you might want to avoid. And then finally, we'll finish it off with role model behavior. So as an instructor, you're going to want to be exhibiting these types of things. So we'll talk about things that we'd like to see you doing and things that we might not want to see you doing. So that's the topic. Now, first of all, I'm going to start off with a question. So if you have already got to direct poll, head over there now. And I'm going to pose a new question if I can get back to it. There it is. So hopefully you should now see the question. How confident were you as a newly qualified instructor to get straight into teaching ocean diver through to dive leader? So basically all of the diver training program. So was it a piece of cake, or is it a piece of cake? You're absolutely supremely confident in your own abilities. Do you think there's ways that you can improve yourself? And is that something that you can do independently? So you can do it through self-study, or do you think there's things that you might need some coaching in? Or finally, are you completely terrified of it all and you've no idea why you do yourself in the first place? So let's take a look at how those results are appearing. So I've hidden the answers so as not to influence the vote until we've got most of the answers in. Okay, so right, we'll leave it there. So let's see. So most of you, the majority of you, think that there's areas that you can work on. And some of you think that you can do that by self-study. Some of you think you can do that with coaching. And thankfully, it's good to see that none of you are absolutely headstrong and think that it's all going to be child's play. That's really good to see. And for the one person who's terrified of it all, don't worry. We can help you through that. But it's good to see that you've that you as a group recognize that there are always ways that you can learn and develop. So that's good to see. So where can we go with this information? Well, self-assessment. So one of the things as an instructor that you need to think about, there's two things that we'll break this down into. There's your personal skills and there's your instructional skills. Now, as an instructor, you are a role model, whether you like it or not, and you need to be able to demonstrate these skills, your personal diving skills, and you need to make sure that you've got them honed, you look good. Otherwise, you're going to struggle to have respect for yourself. Your students might struggle to have respect for you if you're, flailing around in the water. So things that you need to be quite good at as an instructor are finning, buoyancy control, equipment and techniques. So using the equipment that you have, and also rescue skills, which is absolutely critical. Now, it might be the case, and it's absolutely fine if it is, it might be the case that any one of these areas is not your forte, but that's not where you want to be. As an instructor, you need to have supreme abilities to do all of these things. So you need to be able to do them and also to make them look easy. So what you need to be doing with all of these skills, and especially the rescue skills, is just constantly practicing them. So you might find, and I'm aware that some instructors don't like teaching certain elements of certain courses because they find them a bit tricky, or that it's not so nice to do. For instance, rescue skills is a good example. So you find that some instructors may have got out the habit of teaching these things, and that's not really on. What you need to be doing is practicing these skills again and again and again so that you are refreshed and that you're teaching them right. Also making sure that you're up to date. So rescue skills do change periodically. So making sure that you are up to date with those skills is really important. Now, one thing that you can do, you can be very proactive about it, and you can seek feedback. Now, bear in mind that once you get to the level of instructor, you tend to have people giving you less feedback on the fly. You're not going to get, you're less likely to get another diver coming up to you saying, your finning wasn't great, you could try this. Because you're an instructor, you should already know it. So the way to overcome this is to ask other instructors about that and get feedback from your peers, so from other instructors. And also bear in mind that especially with things like buoyancy control, especially, you know, the development never stops. You're always going to be working towards the next thing. So don't just sit on your laurels, keep developing, keep practicing, and those skills will come in line. And then you're in a position where you can then demonstrate them it clearly and properly, which brings us on to instructional skills themselves. Now, being able to do the skill, so, you know, for instance, setting off a DSMB, just being able to do that is not the same as being able to demonstrate it. And hopefully you remember this from your Instructor Foundation course or your OICs, that the steps that you need to do as a demonstration, there's a lot more to it than just doing the skill. You need to break it down progressively, and then you also need to make it look easy. You need to be able to obviously do the thing. So this doesn't just happen by accident. It requires a lot of practice and a lot of patience, and you also need to think about it. So you need to be planning when you're going to do a demonstration, especially early on in your diving careers. You need to think about these things for the first time. How am I going to demonstrate a DSMB? How am I going to do lift and shift of a shot weight, or all these things? And what you need to be thinking about is how to break it down into logical sequential steps. That's really important for the students. It'll help them to learn the skill, and also actually it's a sneaky benefit for you because it also makes it easier. You're not trying to do everything at once. Now, personally, what I find is a good help is using a mirror. Okay, it might feel really stupid and really daft standing there in your scuba gear looking at a full-length mirror in the wall, but it genuinely does help. So you start to see where your hands are, how it might appear to your students. So think about positioning, you know, all the things that were covered in the IFC. I'm very much aware that it's a really busy weekend, that course, and there's a lot to take in, and sometimes some of it doesn't stick as much as we'd hope it would. So that's one to really think about, is your positioning and the sequential steps. So making sure that you've got those nailed. Now, something else that I want to talk about, and I think is included in the courses that you'll have done, is personal development plans. Now, with everything that we do in BSAC, we try to break it down into sequential steps so that you can find it, you get a path, a route to being able to do the skill or demonstrate the skill or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. And your general career progression as an instructor is no exception to this. So a really good tool, and one that I strongly encourage you to use, is a personal development plan. Now, if you're not familiar or you've forgotten it all completely, how does a PDP work? So what you do is you list the relevant topics, areas of skills that you want to cover, and you can also consider splitting your personal skills. So, you know, am I really good at buoyancy? From your instructional skills, how can I demonstrate you know, neutral buoyancy or something like that? And then what you need to do is you need to get a baseline. So get an understanding of your current ability and where you want to get to. Now you can score that. You could red, amber, green it. There's all sorts of different ways. So you've got here some examples. So the top line there that's your red, amber, green. Then that's an example of where it's been scored. And then there's one which is just stars, for instance, you know, 1 star, 3 stars. Now, however you choose to do it is up to you. It's a personal development plan. It's your tool. It's not for anyone else. It's not for, you know, beating you up and making sure that you do things. It's for you to help your own development. So things that you could put on there. So a good example, DSMB deployment is one which is for initially a tricky skill. You could say, well, how am I currently at performing that skill? Yeah, I'm all right. I can set off a DSMB as long as it's good conditions. I might wobble a bit when I'm doing it, but actually what I want to get to in my personal skills is I want to absolutely smash it. I want to be perfectly neutral. I want to make it look brilliant. I don't want to throttle myself with the line or anything like that. And then you come on to the instructional side of things. So if your personal ability is amber, it sort of follows, doesn't it, that your instructional ability is not necessarily going to be quite as strong as it could be. So your target for an instructional, I mean, for me personally, my instructional targets are always going to be 100%. I want to be absolutely perfect at them. Now, that comes you on to the next thing, which is, of course, you can set yourself ambitious targets, but you also need to be able to think about how to them, and also a reasonable time frame. So how do we get from A to B? How do we get from being rubbish at something to being brilliant at something? Well, one of the easiest tools to use, and it's one that I use at work quite a lot, it's a SMART objective. If you're not familiar with the acronym SMART, it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timed. So for me, the key ones are the S, the R, and the T. Specific, reasonable, and timed. Can you do them all in a reasonable amount of time? And have you actually nailed what it is that you're wanting to do? So let's look at that DSMB deployment example. So the current personal one, it's an amber. You want to get to green. So how will you get good at doing DSMB deployment? Well, obviously you're going to have to practice, aren't you? Now, sometimes it's a bit of a fool's errand to just go in and expect opportunities to arise when you're doing normal diving. So you might want to put in a dedicated dive to do something. So find yourself a buddy and then just go out and, you know, put some bungee around a DSMB and then fire it up and drag it back down, fire it up and keep doing it until you've absolutely smashed it. And the you know, the measurable part of that, well, you could say I think I've got it nailed if I'm able to do 5 of them in a row and my buoyancy deviation is minimal. So that's great. Now, instructional wise, how do we get to green on that one? Well, first of all, you know, it ties back to the personal skill, doesn't it? You need to be good at doing it just as a normal skill. So there's an objective in itself. Get green on the personal skill. And then what you might want to do is schedule some training practice with a more experienced instructor, so some peer development. So you can do that with people in your branch, you could do it with the regional crew, your diving officer, whoever. And, you know, we've stuck in there an example of some timing. So say by April 2022, that's when we want to have got that scheduled training carried out. So those are areas that that you could start looking at. Now, I'll open it up to the floor because I'm always curious to hear what other people have got to say. So if you're going to be putting together a PDP right now, what sort of areas do you feel that you'd like to work on? And also, just to follow up on that question, do you think that you've got a good route to being able to do it? Now, this is something that's quite useful to me and probably to the other regional teams, so that we know what our newly qualified instructors need from us. So if any of you've got some things that you'd want to work on, let us know. In the meantime, while those questions, while you're typing away, because I know that takes a little while, let's have a look at the rest of the things that you can do with PDPing. So a PDP is not a static document. It's something that it's a bit like a diary, isn't it? You keep coming back to it and updating it daily or whenever something changes. And the benefit of doing that is it helps you keep momentum. So what you can see on there is an example of my PDP, although I must hold my hands up and say I've not updated it for a couple of months, but then again, I've not done much over the last couple of months. And this has helped me to get to where I am. And this is what I was coached to do. And this is very much, you know, for me, it's not just can I teach it, but also can I identify opportunities where I can teach it on the fly, which is something that you want to do as an advanced instructor. So those are all areas that I've looked at. Now, what else? We've got, so navigation's come up a couple of times there that people have mentioned, and that's a common one, isn't it? That you sort of let loose in a silty pit. So navigation, how are you going to get practiced at navigation? Well, it's a case of trying to identify for me, my advice would be, you know, identifying situations where navigation is going to be really difficult. So, you know, a very silty quarry, and set yourself targets of being able to get from one location to another. But navigation isn't just about using the compass, it's also about natural navigation and pilotage. So perhaps finding an area and doing a dedicated dive with an intention of doing only navigation. So Misha mentions instructional skills for advising on proper weighting. So yeah, so there are tools out there. I'm not going to get too much into it, but there are tools out there for how to do proper weighting. So something like that, you might want to investigate doing a buoyancy and trim workshop and just doing that yourself, or observing another teacher teaching that. So you can pick up a lot from that. Techniques for demonstration. So that's just general instructor etiquette. So we'll come on to that. Thanks for pointing that one out, Simon. And consistency of teaching across all the instructors is something that Tony's mentioned. Again, something that we're going to cover later in this presentation. So that's really good to hear that you're all thinking similar ways to how I'm sort of aiming this. So as I mentioned, a PDP is not just for starting out. It's also for life. It's useful for continuing progression, especially if you're wanting to move through the various grades of instructor within BSAC. So it'll be absolutely valuable if you start to work towards being an advanced instructor or a first-class diver, or I dare say even a national instructor. It's really useful for that. It's useful for working towards other qualifications, which might require lots of things feeding into it. So, perhaps diver coxswain, that's something that has lots of sub skills feed into it. So the ability to handle a boat, but also chart work and understanding the weather. So there's lots of things that feed into that, and that PDP will help you plan that in a way that you can get to it and make it much more achievable. Small bites of the big piece of work. It's also useful if you haven't used it and you haven't encountered one at work. They're quite useful for the non-diving world. At the university, we use PDPs for our own development, and it does help us drive ourselves so you don't get complacent and just not do anything, not keep your qualifications current. So it is a useful tool, and it's something that will probably benefit your life. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to suggest various PDP actions that you can and should be doing. So the first one that we'd like to suggest, and if you're making notes, feel free, take a screenshot, something like that, and I'll also summarize all these PDP actions at the end. But the first one that we suggest is enrolling in an instructor development course within the next year from when you qualify. And this will help cement those teaching skills that you've already picked up. It'll help you and it'll help answer any of the questions that you might have. And it'll just generally make life a lot easier for you as you go on. Now, when you are starting out as an instructor, there's lots of things. It's a bit of a muddle, isn't it? There's so much to try and think about, and the idea of those first few courses, it's a bit terrifying. We've all been there. I certainly have. And it's really important that, first of all, as a newly qualified instructor, you don't pressure yourself, okay? We don't want to burn out or anything like that. We also don't want to make mistakes. So don't pressure yourself into going too fast. Take it slowly, take it easy, and ease yourself into the role appropriately. Also, it's really important not to try and sort of bluff your way through teaching things that you're not ready to teach. If you're not ready, you're not ready. That's absolutely fine. There are ways that you can do this, and you can learn how to teach things if you're not overly familiar. So, BSAC, we're always going on about progressive steps, aren't we? Everything that we teach, everything that we do should always be done progressively, little bite-sized pieces. So my recommendation as a newly qualified instructor would be something like observation first. So sit on the shoulder of another more experienced instructor and watch what they do and just absorb. Okay. Once you've got that nailed, you've observed a course or you've observed a particular skill, then you could perhaps consider moving on to teaching an individual skill as part of the course. So, working with another instructor with students. So you might just choose they might do the first part of mass clearing and then you do, the final part of mass clearing or something like that. Then what you can move on to would be team teaching, where you have the two of you sharing the entire course and equally splitting the elements of each diving lesson. So that would be team teaching. And then finally, a good one, which is often left behind and people think kind of don't really do it that much, is observe teaching. So having an experienced instructor watch you teach a course from start to finish, and then provide honest and fair feedback to you so that you can develop, because initially you're not going to be perfect and there might be things that you could have done differently. And that's a really good opportunity for an experienced instructor to give you that feedback. So yeah, let other instructors be your safety net. Don't try and go it alone right from the start. And also, just remember, it's okay, it's absolutely fine to say to your colleagues, I need support, I need help. No one's perfect right from the get-go. So take it easy and rely on your peers, get help from others. Okay. So PDP action number 2 for you guys, another suggestion. So if your branch already doesn't do this, then have a chat with your training officer or your diving officer to encourage peer-to-peer training within the branch. So if you need advice on this, you can come back to me, or you come back to the regional coaches and ask how that works. But basically, if you haven't got peer-to-peer training in your branch, see if you can get that ball rolling. So let's have a look. Finding students. So this is something. So a lot of NQIs that I've spoken to over the last few years have sort of well, not all of them, but many of them have had similar stories of having a hard time getting practical experience, and for whatever reason. So I'm curious to see, out of the 40 odd of you that are in the room today, have you had much difficulty in getting into practical experience? So how have we phrased this? So let's see. So yeah, easy. My club is really supportive. So you've been given to students and it's been absolutely fine and great. Perhaps it's not so easy. So obviously we've had COVID over the last couple of years, which has meant that the intake has been down. So maybe that's the reason, or it's just that maybe the club has not let you do teaching for one reason or another, or is it just something else entirely? So let's have a look. Let's see. And I'm going to pause it there. Oh, we've still got votes coming in. There we go. Right, so let's see. So 10 of you have got really supportive clubs. 7 of you, sorry, and the 10 of you that have got really supportive clubs, that's brilliant to hear. I'm really glad that you've had the exposure. And it's also really good to see that there's no one's voted that they've not been allowed to teach, which is good. And then there's sort of 8 people there that are struggling to get access to students for one reason or another, and that's fine. And that's something that we can help with and we can talk about. So what are your options? So now if you had a club which they were just not giving you the students, even though the students were there, you've got the option of badgering your diving officer, your training officer, but I don't think that's necessarily applicable for everyone in the room today, but that is an option. But what you can do is volunteer with other clubs. So the difference between one club and another can be quite profound in terms of the instructors that are available, or instructors that are available at a given time. So getting in touch with the clubs around your local area, you don't necessarily need to be a member, but getting in touch and offering your services might reap rewards. It might give you the opportunity to get in touch with other students, and also perhaps a different diverse set of people. So you're learning from a different group. Now, I'm a member of Reading University, and we are always desperate for instructors. And I know that we've got a couple of people in the room this evening who have helped out with us, and that's great. University clubs are always desperate for instructors because of the nature. So yeah, get in touch with your nearest university, and bear in mind that also most training dives tend to happen at the same locations within the UK, don't they? So they always tend to be Vobster or NDAC or Cape and Ray. They tend to be these training venues, and it's not necessarily that you need to get to Timbuktu or wherever the club's based. You just need to get to where they're training, so bear that in mind. And to that end, you can also volunteer with the regional teams and coaches. Now, they might not make use of you as a regional coach, but what you can do is you can learn from those people. So you can, thinking back to the previous slide, you can do team teaching, you can do observed courses, things like that. The regional teams have got some very experienced instructors in there, and they'll be able to help coach you and bring you along and help your skills. So that's a really good piece of advice. If you haven't already done that, go forth, get in touch. So another PDP action for you guys. So think about SDCs as well. So we're all right as an organisation at doing the normal diver training program. So ocean diver, sports diver, dive leader. We've got that nailed. One thing that we're not as good at, but we'd like to be, is skill development courses. So boat handling, chart work, things like that. Now, if you're qualified to teach these things and you haven't got the opportunity, be proactive. Ask if you can run them within your club, and if there's any, even if it's just one student, or again, speak to the regional coach and ask if they would like to offer your services out. And if you're not qualified to teach an SDC and you want to, then request space to observe. You're not taking up necessarily the ratios that the regional team or whoever it is of the instructor to student ratio by just being an observer. You just need to have a buddy with you and you can watch what's happening without really impacting, and that helps you learn what's going on, and perhaps you can then build up to doing team teaching or observed teaching and work towards getting the qualification to teach it. So those are things that you can definitely start working towards. Now, another thing that we've heard is the difference between what's taught in branch and sometimes what's taught in your IFC or your instructor training. So just bear in mind that the skills that you've been taught and the methods are the most up to date ones that BSAC has to offer. Now, they might differ from established branch methods. And I'm curious to know, so if we move on to the next poll question, there we go. So if you head over to the direct poll, I'm curious to know from everyone in the room, was the type of teaching that was carried out in branch that you've seen the same as how it was taught on your IFC or OIC? So, if you were taught how to clear a mask, was the IFC the same as how you were taught as a student? Let's see how the results come in. This will be interesting. Okay, so we're getting a bit of an obvious bar there, aren't we? Right, I'm going to pause it now. Okay, so most people, the majority of people, are saying that the skills as it was taught on the IFC, not quite the same as in branch. 5 of them are identical, which is great to see, and a couple were pretty different. So it's those, the orange and the blue there, that we're concerned with in this section. Now, just because something's different doesn't necessarily mean it's a problem, but it can be. Now, just because you were taught something, the way to teach something in the IFC, and another instructor is teaching it another way, doesn't mean it's terrible. Sometimes they both are fine. Sometimes they aren't, though. Now, there's 2 things that you can do to remedy this situation, rather than getting into a big argument about it. So the first thing is refer back to the instructor manual. The manual is it's the gospel. What it says in the manual is how it should be delivered. So if for instance, steps aren't being taken, and the manual says that you need to break it down into these steps, stick to your guns. If you're the one who's instructing, you should be instructing as per how you were taught. If that's not, if you're struggling to get the answers from the manual, you can always get in touch with HQ, the diver resources team, and they can advise you and they can help coach you through whatever it is that's the difference. But the big takeaway point is that all those instructors on your courses have tried really hard to teach you the very best methods of doing something. What we'd like you not to do is pick up old habits or bad habits, which we're trying to get out of the teaching circuit. So try and stay as fresh and as current as possible. And you can actually be a role model to other instructors by teaching, or demonstrating to them how skills can be taught in a new or better way. So another PDP action for you there, spreading good practice. Now, if your branch has done this, and I know that there's a branch very close to me that has just done this, and it's really good to see, request an OWI refresher. So you can do this via Mark Paisley, who's the coaching, the person in charge of all the regional coaches in the UK, or you can get in touch with your own local regional coach. But encourage your branch to get an OWI refresher. So we'll come in, we'll do some work in the swimming pool and just make sure everyone's up to the same standard. And this plays to what was it that Tony mentioned? Yeah, consistency of teaching across all the instructors. It means everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak, doesn't it? So this brings us on to good and bad habits. So what we think are useful pieces of advice. So the first thing is to recognize is that as a newly qualified instructor, you should develop your own style of teaching. So how I teach is very different to how some of my colleagues at Reading University teach, and that's fine. Vive la différence. But there's a temptation when you start to develop your own style and your own way of delivering that you might be tempted to go your own way and start to teach things in a new and a new and challenging way. Now, as a very experienced instructor who's been doing decades, it might be that in some scenarios you've got a way that works and it's safe and it's great, but that's not what we want to see. As a new instructor, there is a genuine risk that if you start to make things up or change around things, or not teach to the BSAC approach, that you might miss important elements of the course that might not seem as important to you, but are important for lots of different very good reasons. So the takeaway point from this is that you must not rush or skip elements of training just for convenience. I know there's always time pressures when you're out in the water and that you want to try and get people through on one weekend or whatever that pressure is. Resist it. If you're supposed to break a skill down into lots of pieces, there's a reason for that, and it's to help the student pick up that skill and be able to retain it. If you rush them and you rush through the training, there's more of a chance that they won't remember whatever it is you're teaching. And as I'm sure you realize, some of the things that you're teaching are life-saving skills. They're super important. So let's not get into the habit of trying to rush through things just to make life easier on the weekend. Okay. So the tools and methods that have been developed by BSAC, these are things that BSAC's got a long and illustrious history of delivering diver training, and we've developed this teaching approach over decades. It works, and it helps maintain consistency, and it also helps us continue the standard of training, which is extremely high in BSAC. So you really ought to be making use of those tools and those approaches in your day-to-day teaching. So what do I mean by the BSAC approach, and what do I mean by the tools, just in case you've forgotten? Let's just quickly review them, because it's quite often I see briefings not being done without using any of these. So when you're planning a theory and classroom session, remember to work to pave. So make sure it's progressive, so it takes logical steps. Remember, everything about BSAC, it's all about progressive. Make sure what you're saying is accurate, so don't waffle, don't make things up. Try as much as you possibly can to make it visual, and then make sure it's effective. So measure your effectiveness of what your students have learned. So ask questions, keep them engaged, and make sure that the teaching that you're doing is working. It's really easy to lose a classroom. I know this full well. Briefing, it's probably the one that people do the most, which is, it's good to see, but make sure that you are doing an appropriate seeds brief, especially the S of seeds. Safety is absolutely paramount. We'll come on to that later. When you're in the water or you're doing a practical training session, then we ought to be thinking about STEP. So planning your lessons to a STEP acronym. So making sure it's safe and technically correct, and then again effective and progressive. So make sure that the students are having an opportunity to demonstrate back to you, and make sure that you've taught it in a way which is not all in one lump, broken down into logical little chunks. And then finally, you know, at the end of a day or at the end of a session or whatever it is that you're teaching, do conduct a debrief. It's really important. It can help iron out some problems. Sometimes students can be overthinking things. They might not have excelled at whatever they were trying to do in that dive. They can go away with a bit of a downer. It's an opportunity to turn these things around, and also to nip any bad habits in the bud or anything like that. It's really important. So, yeah, why should we bother with each of these? Well, I think I've covered that mostly already. But the key important thing that I wanted to emphasize here is progression. So, in all of these areas, you need to be doing things in bite-sized chunks. Okay. Now, one reason for that is that it helps you as an instructor remember what you're doing. If you try and rush through it and you try and do things on the fly, you're more likely to forget something. If you break it down into progressive steps, it not only helps the student, but it also helps you. So here's one. Is this a silly question? So have you read and committed to memory the entire instructor manual for the lesson you are teaching? Before you go out to water, do you see, do instructors in your club do that? And I think I kind of know the answer. I don't need to put this out to the chat to get the answer for this. And it's for most people is not necessarily. Now, memorizing the entire instructor manual takes years and years of experience. You can't do it on the fly. You'll likely miss those elements. Now, one way of solving that problem really easily is making use of pre-printed slates or making your own. Now, I probably would say I've seen about 50% of instructors when I'm out at, you know, Vobster Key or whatever, 50% of them using slates and 50% not. And I like to think that 50% of those instructors are all absolutely perfect and can remember everything, but I think we all know the answer. Now, if you think to your courses that you've done with instructor trainers, advanced instructors, or even national instructors, did they make use of wet notes? Did they carry wet notes with them? Of course they did. And that's partly its role model, but it's partly because there's a recognition that you can't remember everything. You do need these aid memoirs. So you should be taking that steer. And if you haven't already, then head to the BSAC shop. You'll find pre-printed notes for all of the main courses, so Ocean Diver through to Dive Leader. And if you're trying to save money for whatever reason, and you happen to have some wet notes, you know, £5 notepad, then you can make your own just from the instructor manual. That's absolutely fine as well. But having those little cue cards is really going to help your teaching. So as an instructor, it will eventually fall upon you. If you haven't already had to do this, it will eventually fall on you that you've got to conduct an entire training day, and you might be the one responsible for the schedule or responsible for the students and making sure everything's done. It's absolutely critical that you plan your day properly, so you've got sensible timings. It's no use turning up at a dive site and you've got 6-hour window to dive and saying that you're going to do 3 dives. It might seem well, 6 hours, 3 dives, 2 hours per dive. Oh, it's totally doable. But when actually you think about novice divers who have perhaps never been in the water or never dealt with that conditions, it soon will start to spiral out of control. So make sure you've put in decent breaks or decent amount of slack time. Think about the weather as well. So if it's the middle of winter, those breaks need to be longer so that the students have got opportunity to warm up, especially if they're not in, you know, perfect fitting exposure protection. That's a really important one. But also communicate your plan in advance. So make sure that everybody knows what's happening and when it's happening, so that you've not got this sort of bomb burst thing that you've got one student on one end of the dive site getting a cheeseburger while the rest of them are kitting up. It's really important. So how can you do this? Well, conduct the day. So start the day with a briefing, and I'm not talking about a dive briefing, I'm talking about a day briefing. So when you turn up at the site, everybody knows, including the other instructors, what's happening and when it's happening and what the expectations are. At the end of the day, do a debrief, role model behavior, and also make sure that you've got appropriate dive management. So if you have the ability, get dive support in, because this will make your day easier. So if you've got someone wrangling weights or dragging the O2 kit around, that'll make your life much easier. It means it's less stress on you, less for you to do, and it means you can focus on the task at hand. Now, big takeaway point here, do not rush your students. Okay, so it's all right to make sure to stop flapping if they're all having a chin wag while you're trying to get everyone kitted up. It's fine to tell them to get their kit together, but do not harry your students. Okay, don't try and force them to get in to speed up when it's not comfortable for them. It's a dangerous thing to do. If you haven't got time to do everything that you were hoping to, so be it. Do another dive, do another day. That's just how it has to work. Safety is absolutely paramount, and be mindful of your students' comfort. Now, you might have some all singing, all dancing, perfect dry suit that fits like a glove. You can go and take a pee without having to take it off. All of that stuff, wonderful. Chances are your students, flailing around in a 20-year-old semi-dry that leaks at the wrist and the ankle, and they're going to get cold quickly and all of that. So when you're planning what lessons you're trying to conduct, just because you can do something in summer in one dive doesn't mean the same that you can do it in winter. So think about that. It's worth, if you haven't already seen it, I think it's still up on the BSAC website. I did a set on how to plan a day. So there's some really useful takeaway points there about putting together a timeline. So if you haven't seen that, I'd encourage you to watch that. It'll help you organize your training days. So a PDP action for you there, aside from the watching another hour of me yammer on, is formalize your teaching. So get those slates nailed, so buy some or make your own. And another useful would be create a timeline template so that you can start to populate that when you start to think about what you're doing throughout the day. So thinking about things that go on that template, that's covered in the webinar that I ran. Now, safety, absolutely paramount as diving instructors. This is the single most important element of any teaching that you will do. You absolutely must embed it in what you're teaching. This is why it's the first letter in both SEEDS and STEP. Both of them are safety. You must always ensure your student safety and your own safety. Okay, so the reason why I highlight this, you're all dive leaders, you should all know about safe diving. The reason why I highlight this is because as an instructor, you're focused on other things. Your attention is on your students and not necessarily on areas that you might be focusing on if you were just diving for fun. So be very mindful of the incident pit. If you can't remember what the incident pit is, it's a sort of visualization of what happens when you start to have lots of minor problems combining. It's included in the in Ocean Diver and Sports Diver and Dive Leader. You should be familiar with it, but essentially, in a nutshell, something like a badly fitted fin combined with a shoddy hood can combine. They can all end up combining to something which is incredibly serious, like a near drowning incident or an out of air. Okay, and the important thing is to make sure that they're nipped in the buds. So you need to have a much greater situational awareness what's going on around you. So focusing on what the students are doing, focusing on what you're doing, and thinking about the repercussions of something. So a student's complaining to you that their fin doesn't feel quite comfortable. You should make every effort to try and fix that rather than just blustering through it and saying you'll be absolutely fine, because what you don't want is to have to then deal with that student with a cramping leg whilst another student's feeling cold, and then you're trying to do two things at once, and you're very much over the rim of the incident pit at that point. Another thing to think about is human factors, and I'm not going to get into this. Human factors is a huge area, and it's something that we've talked a lot about online with BSAC. We've done webinars. I've done a webinar. I think we've got another one scheduled very shortly, or just happened. But human factors is something that you need to be aware of and need to be familiar. So you need to think about how human factors will affect you as an instructor and your students as well. So this is why, as PDP action number 6 for you guys, what I'd like you to do is watch the Human Factors in Diving webinar that is available on the online hub. If there's one thing that you should be doing out of all of the suggestions, is this one. Make sure you watch the Human Factors, and also get into the habit, at least initially, for every skill or every lesson that you're going to teach, conduct a little mini risk assessment. Now, this can be on paper or it can be in your head, but ask yourself, are there ways that I break this down and make it safer? Or are there something that I can do to make the skill safer overall? So, for instance, when you're demonstrating a mask skill, how can I make it safer? Well, using a datum, having the students hold on to a datum line will make it safer while you're incapacitated with your mask off. That's one way you can make it safer. There's things that you can do. There's safe elements that you can add to every single skill that you teach as part of the diver training program. It's really important that you think about those and embed them into your own practices. So let's get you guys woken up a little bit and see if you have any thoughts yourself about bad habits. What bad habits do you think are very common? What bad habits have you seen out there on the dive site? What do you think we should be mindful of avoiding? So, I'll talk about it later on, but one that, gets my goat all the time, as my fellows in my club know, is seeing equipment lying around on the ground with regulators in a puddle full of grit. It's a really good way of breaking regulators. It's a really good way of getting free flows. What other sort of things like that do you think we should be mindful of avoiding? What bad habits, or also what instruction bad habits have you seen, have you observed? If any of you got any suggestions. I'm just going to take a drink. No, it's all quiet out there. Everyone's obviously not seen any bad habits or anything like that out in the wild, which is surprising. Or everyone's really slow at typing this evening. Okay, well, while we're waiting for some answers to come in, let's have a look at role model behavior. So, role model behavior. What do we mean by this? Well, first of all, as an instructor, other divers, whether they're BSAC or not, will view you as a representative of the organization you're teaching for, and you're a representative of our values. And BSAC is positioned itself. It is the governing body for diving in the UK. We've got a responsible position, and our instructors are responsible individuals. You need to be upholding that side of the bargain, if that makes sense. So you leading by example is absolutely critical. And there's a few reasons for this. Obviously, there's reputation that we've got to uphold, but also, and I'd say it's probably more important, is that your students will copy your behaviors. So the whole adage, do as I say, not as I do, has absolutely no place in diver training and no place in BSAC whatsoever. Okay. What you tell people to do, what you instruct students to do, you should also be doing the exact same. So there are two ways that you can and should exhibit your role model behavior. And what I'm talking about here are your words and your actions. Okay. So we'll cover your words first. And what do I mean by your words? Well, obviously it's what you talk and your speech. And the first things that we'll talk about is professionalism and courtesy. So, of course, BSAC, we're all volunteers, we're all unpaid, but that doesn't mean to say that you can just go about instructing as you would a trip to the local pub. Your choice of language is really important. You need to have a certain level of professionalism. So if you can, I know some people find it very hard, but if you can avoid foul language, then please try to have friendly and open language and in your tone. Okay, I've seen lots of instructors out there be quite sharp, and there's a good reason for that. Instructing, as I'm sure you're beginning to realize, is quite a stressful thing. It's really important that you try and stay positive and keep your tone light. Okay, this will mean that your students bond better with you, and also you impart less stress on them. If the student is already thinking that they're in trouble, and then you go in with the sharp school teacher voice, they're going to switch off a little bit, and that's not good. You really don't want that. Also, positivity versus negativity. So it's one of these things, and I think it's what lots of people's grandmas have said in the past, which is if you've got nothing good to say about someone, don't say it at all. And it's a fair thing to say. And I'm not talking about giving feedback to students, but I'm just talking about generally talking on the dive site and talking about other things. That conversations tend to evolve as you're out there doing your instruction. People might ask you about other diving agencies or other instructors and things like that. Try and stay positive. We don't want to be bashing any other organization or anything like that, or any other clubs. Stay positive, keep it light, and that's the best thing. Now, the other thing that I want to address, and I've seen this countless times, and it makes me cringe every time I see it, is these shaggy dog stories that instructors love to tell, and club members, about the time that they almost died when they drowned and things like that. You need to be careful about that, because what you might think is amusing to a novice diver or to someone else, do they think it's amusing? And what they might find absolutely terrifying, it might be something that you think is absolutely fine. A flooded dry suit. We've all got stories like that. You need to be careful about the audience that you're speaking to, and making sure that these are people that you are not going to impact with what you're saying. So do think about that before you speak. Another thing is inclusive language, and it's obviously it's a hot topic, and it has been for a couple of years now. It probably ought to have been a hot topic for a lot longer, but being inclusive is really important. Now, some of my colleagues, Laura and James, yesterday did a presentation on club culture, which covered a lot about diversity and inclusion. So I'm not going to reinvent the wheel there. Do watch that. But in terms of inclusive language, I'll just give you some examples of things that you don't want to do. So make assumptions. So making assumptions on someone's gender that you don't know, try not to. Try to use non-gendered pronouns until you know what people's pronouns are. So some people do prefer they. Some people might identify as male or female or other. Just be mindful of that. Ladies and gentlemen, or even worse, boys and girls, it's old-fashioned. Don't use it. Use non-gendered language. So if you have to address a group, you could use everybody. You can use folks. You can use things like that. I try to, I like to use friends and enemies, because then you've got people scratching their heads for a minute thinking, well, which one do I fall into? And also be mindful that sometimes you might subconsciously be treating or addressing different genders in different ways, and you will be observed, and different people will notice that, and you don't want to be seen to be treating people differently based on their gender. So please be mindful of these things. Now, also on a similar vein, names and pronouns. Now, this has come directly from experience that I've had people complain to me about other instructors. Thankfully, not within my own branch, but it comes with firsthand on a number of different instances. Use of names, very important, and use of pronouns and correct pronouns is important. I've covered pronouns already, but pronunciation of unfamiliar names. We're a multicultural society, so you might be familiar using names like Tony and Bob and things like that. but names from other nations and cultures might not trip off the tongue so readily. That's fine, but you must make an effort to learn them. Do not shorten people's names because of convenience for yourself. Some people find that offensive. If they have their own nickname, then you can address it if they choose to, but don't assign people nicknames to make your life easier because you cannot pronounce someone's name. That's not cool. Also, never make a joke about someone's name. That's someone's name and pronouns. That is their identity. You make jokes about someone's identity, you're not a very nice person. So don't do that. Okay. So that comes on to humor. Actually, humor can be a very powerful tool, and we should be including humor in our teaching. It's really valuable and has many benefits. And diving can be stressful. Breaking the tension with a bit of a laugh, absolutely. But it is a double-edged sword. So it's for all the benefits, you can also have all of the disadvantages that take away all the benefits. And one adage which always sticks in my mind, which is offense is taken, it's not given. So just by saying no offense doesn't mean that it's not offensive. Okay, people take offense for things that you say, and just because you think it's a joke doesn't mean to say that it doesn't cause offense, and in some cases real harm. Okay, so biggest areas of risk. Okay, I think this is fairly straightforward and fairly, I'm hoping I'm teaching, preaching to the choir here, but derogatory humor. So it is basically anything which is knocking people or individuals, groups of persons, anything that's personal, try to avoid it, and absolutely don't try and combine humor with any protected characteristics. So don't be making jokes about women or blondes or all of those things. Any of the protected characteristics, just stay absolutely clear. It's no longer acceptable. We shouldn't be doing it. You should stay professional. Okay, so in terms of role model behavior, I'm curious to know, and we'll stick it up on the poll here. So if you head back to the direct poll, I'll just put it back into the chat in case any of you have lost it. Oh, there we go. Right. I've just seen, sorry, I do apologize. I've had a load of things just pop up of bad habits that we can do here. So while we're waiting for people to answer on the direct poll, we'll just loop back to bad habits that people have seen. Hoses hanging loose, yeah, leaving cylinders, kit left unattended, short briefings, yeah, no recording of air, so no dive management basically. Exiting the water with mask off and regulator out, that's a really good one actually. A lot of instructors, they get to the surface, a regulator comes out of their mouth and they start teaching their students while they're still in the water. Bad idea, okay, because people need to keep their regulators in their mouth while they're in the water, or switch to a snorkel. And over-reliance on computers, as Happy Diver says, a lack of awareness of tables. So yeah, underlying knowledge is a good one. So let's bring it back to the jokes and inappropriate things. So the question was, have you seen other divers make jokes which were not appropriate? And the overwhelming, resounding answer is yes, and that's not good to see, is it? And I think that's perhaps some of that's down to the demographic of the diving, the people that we have diving, and not everyone sits and listens to these things and understands why they're not appropriate, which is where you can be part of the solution. So the next question is, did you or would you, if you were, for those people who haven't seen anything, did you or would you address the problem? So let's have a look. Yes, always happy to call out when need be. Yes, but I think I'd find it hard. And then the last one, I'm not sure I'd feel confident enough to go and call out that sort of behaviour. Okay, so I think everybody's voted there. And that's absolutely what I'd expect, which is the majority of people saying that they'd find it hard. and we've got 7 brave souls who are always going to call out people who are perhaps a bit gobby like me. And it's good to see that the majority of you feel that you're empowered enough to go and call out these sort of behaviours. For those of you who feel you're not sure you're confident, don't worry, that's absolutely fine. It depends on the dynamic of the group and what's happening. But one thing that I would encourage is there's lots of ways to address a problem. You don't need to necessarily tackle it head on if someone makes a joke and it's in a group. You can choose to call out that in front of the person, but then that could invite challenge, and it could cause difficulties on the day. An alternative would be to go and speak to that person in private and say, look, I understand why you might have felt that was funny, but it would be remiss of me not to just highlight that that's not really appropriate, and there are these people, these types of persons who might find that offensive, and you need to perhaps avoid doing that sort of joke in future. There are ways of tactfully approaching that. If you're not confident enough, then that's fine. But I'd really encourage, in one way, shape, or form, for us to start addressing these things. We do need to work towards stamping out inappropriate language and comments and things like that. And as newly qualified instructors, you are the people who will start to make that change. So please do really hope that you feel empowered to do that. Right, let's see. So personal growth. So how can you develop yourself? So something that we'd like you all to do, and this comes from our benevolent BSAC overlords, is that we would like you all to take the BSAC Equality, Diversity and Inclusion e-learning module. So this will help, this will sort of expand upon some of the things that I've talked about this evening in a lot more detail. And by doing this, you'll be in a much better position to be much more inclusive to all sorts of the rich variety of people that we really want to be part of our club. Okay, be as welcoming as possible. So please do that. So equipment considerations. So there's a lot of people in the sort of bad behavior feedback have mentioned equipment. So the first thing that I'd like to highlight, and it's not necessarily the easiest thing, I get that, if you're relatively new to diving, is your equipment of a decent standard? So as an instructor, think back to the role model thing. If you're rocking up at a dive site with a smashed up regulator and stuff that's hissing and going bang, or gauges that are cracked and bubbling, it's not going to inspire confidence in your students. Also, are you being a role model? Are you turning up at a dive site with the little Apex logo inside your first stage of your regulator that says it should have been serviced 2 years ago? Are you one of those people? Because the students will notice that, and why should they bother getting their regulator serviced if their instructor doesn't? So think about that. Another thing which is quite common that you see is the equipment universal and understandable to a novice? So are you turning up on a dive site trying to teach students Ocean Diver in side mount or a twin set or something like that? Now, it might sound really stupid, but I've seen it done. I've seen people doing it, and it confuses the. So try and keep it as comparable as possible, and this will help you demonstrating skills. So it's going to be a lot harder to do regulator retrieval and the students understand it if you're wearing a twin set and you're using a long hose. And also it avoids the us and them paradigm. So your students want to see you as a peer. They don't really want to see you as someone using completely different equipment. Okay. So turning up and teaching on a rebreather when everyone else is using open circuit, at this stage, I think it's something that we should probably try and avoid initially. Now, with regards to configuration of kit, what we should try and do is ensure that safety related conventions, they're not necessarily rules, and I get that, but if where possible, try and uphold those conventions. So If you're using a weight belt, put it on properly so that it's right hand release. If you've got an AS, which you absolutely should have, then make sure you put it in the right place. It shouldn't be clipped under your armpit or anything like that. It needs to be in the area formed between your chin, shoulders, and hips. That will help in teaching AS skills for a start, but also it's demonstrating that role model thing that this is where the kit should be. If you see it's not there, correct your students and demonstrate on your own equipment. It's easy to do that way. And safe use, and this sort of feeds back to, some of the comments in the chat there. Ensure that you are not demonstrating unsafe acts. So ones that I see all the time, picking up a weight belt by the buckle only, so all the weights slide around and potentially drop on a foot. In a UK dive site where everyone's wearing rock boots, perhaps not as dangerous, but if you're out in the tropics and you're on a dive boat, weight on the foot's going to be a broken toe, possibly not diving for the rest of the trip. Leaving kit or tanks stood up, very good way to blow up a tank if it falls over or damage regulators. And leaving second stages on the ground, I already mentioned that, but they're just some examples. So be the person that you would want to observe yourself as an instructor. So make sure you are looking after your kit as if it was something that you'd borrowed from someone. Very important. So we're going to finish off now with just a little bit more feedback from yourselves. So I'd like to see if you guys can come up with any one-word descriptions and see if there's any that sort of we get some repetition from. So some one-word descriptions that should apply to a role model instructor. So this could be, handsome or brave, or it could be. So we've got some interesting ones already. So banterless. Which is an interesting one. Yeah, that's a fair point, especially what we said there. Unflappable, competent, inspiring, methodical, calm, safe. Safety is a priority. So yeah, we're getting a few people saying safety there, which is really, really good to see. Practiced, professional, good. Thanks, John. A good instructor is really important. Fun, yeah. Fun is a big part of it. Now, it's a fair point actually to sort of sum up that I'm being a bit serious on some of the points here, and they are important points. But what Simon says, fun is also very important. We should be making our students have a fun time. Otherwise, what's the point in doing this? We do, that we're not jumping in the water to go and defuse, bombs and mines and things like that. Or at least I think most of us in this room aren't in it to do that. We're in there to have fun, and we should be making sure that the students are also having fun. So by being a fun person to be around, you're going to inspire confidence and such. So yeah, thank you very much for your comments there, guys. That's really useful. So in summary, so to wrap things up, and again, a bit of role model behavior. Every presentation, every teaching thing that you should do should have a summary. You should talk through it. So self-assessment. So we've talked about personal instructing skills. So hopefully you recognize that the two are entwined, but they are discrete as well. They're linking to each other, but they are two different areas that you need to develop, and you need to make sure that you have a plan to develop that. Now, if you're sitting on a computer, get ready with your print screen button or your image crop clipper or whatever, or if you want to take a photo of it. This is all of the SMART objectives that we've been through today. So these are all the examples. So we've covered things like general instruction, SDCs, good practice, teaching methodologies. We've talked about safe diving, which is really important. And we've touched on ED&I. So take this as a starting point. Okay, this is not your PDP. These are examples of things that we'd like to see you do, but I'm sure you're beginning to realize that there are so many areas that you can cover. The more detail you put into the PDP, the more you're going to get out of it. So I really do encourage you to have a go at this. So what else have we talked about? We talked about starting out and the progressive steps that you can take to build confidence in yourself and to also get feedback. We talked about where you can find students and sharing experience. So that's both upwards and downwards. So learning from more experienced and also perhaps teaching more experienced instructors good habits. And on those good habits, we've talked about the approach that you should be taking. So that's the BSAC methodologies, appropriate planning, making sure you're diving safely. And then finally, we finished off with role model behavior. So we talked about you being a leader and leading by example. We talked about the things that you should be and shouldn't be saying. You talked about your actions and the things that we ought to be avoiding doing. So that's about it for now. What I'm going to do now is open the floor. Now, if I get a second, if you've got any questions, you can ask them in the chat. And if I manage to, in a second, so now if you do want to ask a question using your microphone, you're more than welcome. You should be able to unmute yourself. So yeah, I'm open to questions now, so fire away. And if you're done, then thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.